Welcome to Introduction to Essential Oil Chemistry. My name is Peter Minke. My PhD is in cell biology, just to give you the context of what my education is and where I'm coming from. I'm not a chemist, but I'm very, very excited about essential oil chemistry. And what I'm going to do is teach a basic introduction. Okay, this is not going to be heavy-duty chemistry, but there's going to be a little bit of chemistry. But also, I'm going to talk about biology. What is the biology? What's going on in the plant? What I am going to do in this course and what I'm not going to do in this course is I am going to talk a little bit about essential oils and the biology of that and plants and chemistry, but I'm also assuming you know what essential oils are basically. Okay, so if you don't have any clue about what essential oils are, then you'll want to take one of my other courses on essential oils. This is an introduction to some of the chemistry, and the purpose of it is if we understand a little bit about the biology that leads to the chemistry of these compounds or these products that we call essential oils, then we have a better understanding of how to use them. We have more confidence that when we read about something and we hear these different chemical terms, terpenes or phenols or aldehydes or whatever, then you have a better idea of what we're talking about, and then we don't get confused. And I'm going to clarify some of the little bit of confusions that can happen out there from people who don't know chemistry, but they think they do. And so just a little bit of information there to help clarify information that's out there on the internet. As we go through this course, I want to make clear that I've got a disclaimer here that the information is for educational purposes only. This is not intended to diagnose or prescribe or treat any condition of the body, and any information should not be used as a substitute for medical counseling with a health professional. And we're not going to take any responsibility if you don't use it, if you use this in any other way than that. Okay? So that's our little disclaimer. Again, this is for information. Anything I say that might be linked to, peripherally linked to a medical condition or anything is all just information, not intending to suggest anything medically or oriented. As I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about plant essential oils, and because essential oils are manufactured or made in the plant, it makes sense to talk a little bit about the biology of the plant. What is happening in the plant? What is the plant doing when we talk about essential oils, the plant's making essential oils? Is this just something that it forgot how to make glucose and so it turns out and makes essential oils instead? What's happening in the biology? Why is the plant doing it? What and why? Now let me, before I go into the next slide, just to make a note that not all plants produce significant amounts of essential oils. So really there's only a subset of plants in the world that create or make essential oil compounds. So that's just something to consider. It's not every single plant that produces essential oils. Okay, so why are some of the plants producing essential oils, and what do they do for the plant? And so plants produce these essential oils is the first point we need to understand. In other words, when we look carefully at the leaf structure, like say for peppermint, a peppermint leaf, if we do a scanning electron micrograph and look very carefully at the surface of a peppermint leaf, we will find tiny little basic factories, little warehouses and factories of essential oil production. In other words, this is not just a random, haphazard, maybe I'll make a compound here today or tomorrow, whatever. The plant has a very deliberate biology. It's called secondary metabolism in the plant world, which means it's actually manufacturing these compounds, essential oil compounds, from raw materials. In other words, it's spending energy doing this from glucose. So it grabs sunlight, produces glucose. Okay, we've heard about that in terms of photosynthesis. And then this precious glucose is what it makes its entire plant structure out of, and it's its energy source. So why would it use this precious glucose to make these secondary metabolites, okay? And so it's not a random soup, it's not a random process, it's very deliberate. And it must be physiologically worth it. So why? One way to look at this maybe simplistically is that plants cannot move, okay? For you and I, if our environment changes, if we have a cold front come in, if it's too hot, if we get exposed or there's an illness going on at somewhere, we can run away from it. We can move into a more stable, steady situation. Plants can't do that. They're rooted in the ground. They have to deal with whatever is coming along. So the plant has to have some chemistry, some ability to adapt to what's happening. And some of these issues are infections, damage, predators, and weather variations are some of the types of things that a plant has to deal with. Now, keep in mind, our biology and the plant biology are very similar from a standpoint of we have to have a very narrow physiological condition in which to operate. And it's called homeostasis. You might have heard that term. We keep a very narrow pH in our blood. We have a very narrow range of temperature that we tolerate. So for us, our cells cannot handle variation off of a few degrees, okay? A plant can handle a lot more variation. Why? One, because of its structure, but at its cell biology level, it has a chemistry, it has helpers to manage this stress, okay? And so we'll look at these from a context of essential oils. For example, if we're looking at how this works in the essential oil field, we'll take frankincense for an example. Frankincense is a tree that grows in the northern African area, over in southern Arabia and northern Africa, Ethiopia. And the way that they distill essential oils from frankincense is they collect the sap. Well, in order to collect the sap, the tree has to be scraped or wounded, and then the sap bleeds out. Now, we would know that for us, if we made a scrape, we would bleed either blood or lymph, and that would be helping to clean the wound. Well, it's the same thing in the tree. The tree gets wounded, and so the sap flows out, and it helps to heal the wound and protect the tree from damage. Is it any surprise, then, that when we look at the properties of frankincense oil, they have anti-scarring properties that are healthy for the skin and to support the immune system? For us, that's what it does for us, and it does the same thing for the plant. In other words, we're starting to see this common biology sort of port over from plants to us, which shouldn't be a surprise. We eat plants for food. Obviously, some amount of the biology in plants has to be similar or identical to us. And so what we really have, let me push it one step further, what we really have in essential oils is nature's ultimate stress management tool. Consider essential oil production, right? We grow a lavender plant. There's a whole field of lavender. So here's this happy little lavender plant shining in the sun. Out comes Gary Young one morning, and he identifies that this is the right time to harvest. So now what happens to the plant? Whack, right? I mean, along comes the machinery, cuts the plant in half. We've got major trauma, okay? So what's the plant going to do now? It's going to go into hyperdrive to produce protective chemicals that protect the plant from damage, from oxidative damage, from DNA damage, okay? And that's exactly what it does. And you might have heard, as you look at different plants that are distilled, you might have heard that it requires that they sit for an hour or a couple hours before the oil production is at its highest. What's happening in that plant material in that hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours while it's sitting? It's sitting there cranking out essential oils. It's taking its last ditch effort, the last sap that's in the plant, and it's producing essential oil compounds as a protective for the tissue. The tissue at the top, I mean, as the plant gets cut, the flowering part at the top doesn't know that it's been cut. At the cellular level, it's sitting there. It doesn't go into this, oh wow, I'm dead now. It doesn't know that. It just says, I'm starting to get oxidized, I'm starting to have damage, I'm starting to lose the balance in the physiology, so therefore the plant leaf goes into major production of essential oils. And so that's what we have is this last bit. And this is the chemical stress management tool. And again, they are antioxidant. They protect the DNA from damage. They protect membranes from damage. And that's exactly what we get when we have essential oils. They work the same way for us. These essential oils, which are the last effort the plant offers to protect itself, we can collect this, and the essence of that is extremely protective. And you see all kinds of different research that's been done, thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles. These are done by PhD researchers in labs all over the world, and it's been done for a couple hundred years now. And they document various effects of essential oils. Now, not necessarily one essential oil has all these properties, but you can look in the literature and you can find out if you looked at the broad literature, we can see various types of attributes: antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, anti-tumoral. So I've seen some studies where they inject essential oils into tumors and see the tumor reduction. We have immune-stimulating, antioxidant, vasodilating, some effects on the circulatory system to dilate the blood vessels. We have oxygenation of tissue, effects on the mood and brain chemistry, muscle relaxation, and many, many more things. The point here is that our biology, our tissue reacts the same way to these essential oils that the plant tissue does. In the plant, these are manufactured to protect the plant, and they do the same thing for us. And this kind of research, I'm talking thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles, this kind of research supports what I'm talking about. These are totally relevant for our own health and our own physiology. Let's talk a little bit about the chemistry. Now, I don't want to scare you off, but let's just talk a little bit about the chemistry, and I think you'll start to understand as we start to see some of these terms. If you're looking up in an essential oil reference book, you'll see that certain compounds and constituents are present, alpha-pinene and these different compounds. What are terpenes and sesquiterpenes? What are these? So let's look a little bit about the chemistry, but before we go into chemical structures, let's just take a step back and understand what is this chemistry? How do we put this chemistry into context? Again, I've been mentioning that there's a shared chemistry between us and plants. If you look at the DNA structure, if you look at ribosomes and protein production, if you look at the glucose, it's identical between our bodies and theirs. They produce glucose, we use glucose. We produce ATP, they produce ATP. Obviously, we can look at the outside of it and say, wow, there's a big difference. But on the inside, the machinery inside the cell is virtually identical, all the way through the entire animal, plant, even microbial kingdom, okay? So there's a very, very common shared biology. Very similar, in some cases, identical processes occur across everything from a fungus and even a bacteria all the way up to us. When we're talking about the chemistry here, what chemistry are we talking about? And typically when you talk to chemists or in the chemistry field, we have two branches of chemistry, inorganic and organic. Inorganic chemistry is basically everything that does not have to do with carbon, and organic chemistry has to do with carbon. Now, I bring this up because you might hear the term organic and you think organic farming, where we have this definition of organic farming as something that's done without pesticides and everything else. In the context of organic chemistry, we're not talking about the natural no pesticide chemistry. We're talking about the chemistry of carbon. So the term organic has been sort of usurped a little bit by agriculture to mean something different than, okay, so when I'm saying organic chemistry, I'm talking about the chemistry of carbon. It's very simple. We are organic beings, meaning we are based on carbon, okay? Some additional thoughts here that when we're talking about production of essential oils, I think it's very important to understand, again, in the context of plant biology, that this is not an accident. The plant has a series of genetically controlled enzymatic processes that are controlled by enzymes, which means little proteins that are cutting and snipping molecules and putting them together. And this is very deliberate. And they build complex essential oil compounds in this process. So this is not something that it just happened to come up with yesterday. This is something hardwired in its biology, and it spends a lot of effort and very complex physiology to manufacture these compounds. And it's a reproducible system. Okay? Again, this is not a random thing. Certain plants will produce consistently certain types of compounds. Does that make sense from a standpoint? So when we talk about lavender plant, it's going to produce lavender oil. It's not going to accidentally produce peppermint oil. Okay? If we've got peppermint plant that's going to produce peppermint oil, and it's going to produce pretty much the same thing every time. Now, we might vary in some of the levels and constituents a little bit, but basically the biology is already, the production machinery is already genetically hardwired. It cannot change that easily, okay? Now, you could also say, well, when you create variations or find variations of oregano, well, one oregano plant might have slightly different genetics, slightly different chemistry than another and produce a different kind of oil. You look at eucalyptus, lots of different eucalyptus trees, lots of different subspecies and species of eucalyptus trees. They are genetically different. Therefore, we might expect a different essential oil, not necessarily maintaining exactly the same. But within one type of species, you're going to get that commonality. So the plant has these pathways to build many different compounds out of the same building blocks. And that's the third point I want to make here. The plant can produce, out of one basic building block, it can produce a lot of different kinds of chemistry. And I'm going to show you now how that works. Basically, what I want you to come away with is that we can trust that the plant is going to do the same thing every time and that its biology is the same as us. That is not the same when we're talking about manufacturing essential oil compounds in a lab. And we can talk more about that in a different context. Okay, so let's look at some of these structures. The basic building block of essential oil chemistry is what's called an isoprene unit. It's this unit here on the, maybe your left. The basic unit, it's a 5-carbon molecule with 2 double bonds, okay? And the way carbon molecules are depicted in pictures, if you see pictures in books and things like that, typically you'll have this kind of stick picture with these angles of sticks rolling up. Well, every point at the end of a stick is a carbon atom, and every stick is a bond. If there's 2 sticks or 2 lines, then it's a double bond. So in this case, we see a 4-carbon chain, 1, 2, 3, 4, with 2 double bonds, and then a side chain sticking off. Okay, and so this would be considered 1,3-butadiene. So butane. Let me share with you just a little bit about chemistry. Again, don't freak out about this organic chemistry nomenclature. But you've heard of methane. Okay, methyl and methane. Maybe you've heard of methanol. Okay, that's that's a 1 carbon. Methyl refers to 1 carbon. Methanol is an alcohol with 1 carbon. Then we go to ethyl, okay, which is ethanol, or 2 carbons. So then we go to propyl alcohol, right? That's 3 carbons. And you heard of propane, methane, ethane, and propane. All right, so propane is something we burn as a fuel. Well, the next one up is what? Butane. You've heard of butane that's 4 carbons. So this is actually a 4-carbon chain, and so it would be considered a butane of some kind. In this case, because it has 2 double bonds, it's considered a butadiene, butadiene, and it has 1 methyl group sticking off of it, so it would be a 2-methyl-1,3-butadiene. So here's our isoprene unit. Now, in this red box here we have the isoprene, but we start to see as we make more complicated molecules, we start adding isoprene together. So in the case of geraniol, okay, that's present in geranium oil, we have 2 isoprenes stuck together end to end. Alpha-pinene is also 2 isoprene units, but now it's stuck together differently. They were sandwiched side by side. And now we have menthol, which is in mint, which is another 2 isoprenes stuck together, but they're put together differently. So you can see this building block is extremely versatile. We can flip this thing around and stick it together. We can stick it end to end, head to head, tail to tail, or we can stick it side to side, and we end up with very different molecules. Same starting block, and yet you can look at the structure of this and say this is a ring structure, this is a very weird, complex ring structure, and then we have this linear molecule of geraniol. Right away, we can already see we can flip and flop this thing around and make very different chemistry and very complex chemistry. So here we have the diagram done slightly differently. Before we had the ball and stick, now, or just the stick actually, and now we have the actual letters. C for carbon, double bond carbon, single bond carbon, double bond carbon, and then so you see that a little bit more. And so what we see here is a tail-to-head arrangement which gets us a compound called myrcene. So we start with isoprene, and we start putting 2 isoprene units together, and we get the term terpene. 2 isoprenes, terpene. Okay, the way to think about that. So we have 2 isoprenes. Now we have alpha-pinene is stuck together as we show here. Here's the depiction of that. We've got a head-to-head connection almost sort of stacked on top of each other, and we get that alpha-pinene. So here we go. They're both terpenes. They're both made out of 2 isoprenes, but they're very different chemistry. Okay, and then we see here where we can take 1 compound and not change the number of isoprene units at all, but flip it into a ring structure and make it a completely different compound. So here's the production of limonene, which you might know from lemon oil. And so limonene can be produced from geranyl paraphosphate, which is basically geraniol, that same geraniol compound. And if we flip that, change it a little bit by adding a phosphate group on it, which actually gives it a little bit of energy to make the reaction happen, and then it flips into a ring structure and bonds it together, and we now have a completely different compound. So you can see in a plant that produces geraniol, it can now go into different directions depending on which enzyme it has or which series of enzymes it has. Okay? And the kinds of control mechanisms that the plant is using is still being elucidated. We don't understand how and why the plant goes in one direction or another for producing some of these things. It's very complex biology. Okay, again, the source here is from an organic chemistry textbook, 2nd edition by John McMurray. It's way back when I was in school, 1988 edition, but the chemistry hasn't changed, okay? And here's our final example of some chemistry. I won't get too much more than this. We're going to stop at sesquiterpenes. So we had terpenes, which is 2 isoprene units. Now we have sesquiterpenes, which is 3 isoprene units. Just as before, we start with geranyl pyrophosphate, and we add one more isoprene unit, and we get farnesyl or farnesol from citronella oil. Okay, obviously very different essential oil compound, very different molecule, completely different biology between geranyl or geranol and farnesol. Okay, but you can see all we're doing is just adding one more piece. Okay, so hopefully that helps simplify a little bit about the mechanics of what the plant is doing. If you study plant biology and the glucose, it'll start out with glucose and produce various different things from it. In this case, we're producing a lot of different things from isoprene. I can't do an introduction to chemistry course without talking about phenol and the confusion around the word phenol. There are people out there that are talking about how essential oils are dangerous because they contain phenol. And it's something I want to clarify, because the word phenol actually has 2 different uses. Phenol as a group or a category refers to compounds, any compounds, with a hydroxyl group bonded directly to an aromatic ring. That's considered a phenol. Okay? It's also called a phenolic. In other words, something that has a phenol type structure. But that would be generically called a phenol. Okay? But then there is the word phenol, which refers to a specific compound, which is this one right here, also known as carbolic acid, okay, which is a benzene ring with a hydroxyl group. And that's it. A benzene ring with a hydroxyl group, that is the term, that is the compound phenol. The problem is that compound phenol is very caustic, it's carcinogenic, and in the research labs, when we use it for various extractions, we use it with the fume hood and the goggles and the gloves. It's very dangerous, nasty stuff. So obviously, if you were hearing that essential oils contained phenols as a category, but you didn't understand, and you knew that phenol was bad, you might think, oh, I don't want to use those essential oils, those are toxic, those are bad, they're bad chemistry. So just to clarify, again, this is a carcinogenic compound called phenol, but then a class of compounds called phenolics or phenols. It would include methyl salicylate, which is a compound found in wintergreen essential oil, which has great anti-inflammatory properties and great for analgesics and pain type of things. So we would have no hesitation whatsoever to rub our body with wintergreen oil or to put it in our gum as a flavoring agent, but of course we wouldn't want to touch anything with phenol in it. So do you see the difference here? So we've got this very, very simple change. One little addition would change the chemistry entirely. So again, the biology can change radically with one small change. There's not phenol in essential oils, but there are phenolic compounds. So just clarifying that. And so you can see we can have a lot of different diverse chemistry in one plant. As I mentioned, like lavender oil. Again, I'm reminding you that the plant produces pretty much the same lavender oil every time, but it has very complicated chemistry within that lavender oil. In the example here, we might hear of folk medicine or traditional understanding of the use of lavender oil, and you look it up and you find all these different uses. How can it be relaxing at the same time it's good for burns, it's skin? How can it be that good for so many different things? It's just not possible. Well, of course, we find out, yes, it is possible because there's a very complicated chemistry. It can help with all these things, skin, calming down the nervous system, breast health, immune system, all these things. And it can do that because it has many, many different constituents. Those constituents are consistent among the same lavender plant. I mean, they might vary in amounts, but it's consistent chemistry, but it is chemistry. So that's why one essential oil can have many different uses. In our Family First Aid with Essential Oils talk, we talk about one of our principles of use is to use what you have. In other words, don't wait for the perfect oil to come along, because chances are there's some chemistry in almost every oil or any oil. There's some chemistry in there that can be used to help your tissue or help your body or whatever the issue is that you're working on. Okay, so that's one of our principles from Family First Aid with Essential Oils. I want to leave you with this concept here that we are dealing with natural chemistry, okay? The chemistry of nature. When nature produces compounds, it does it consistently the same way every time. And when the nature produces a compound, those compounds are harmonious with our biology because we have a shared biology, a shared chemistry. What's happening in the plant cell and what's happening in our cell is basically the same, okay? And this becomes very, very important when we're talking about essential oil quality. You've heard of people synthesizing or using adulterated essential oils and wondering, does that really make that much of a difference? Does it matter whether we have a synthetic essential oil or a natural essential oil? It's all the same chemistry, right? Same compounds. And my point on this is it is not the same chemistry. And so here's a paper about eugenol. Eugenol is the primary ingredient in clove oil. When they produced eugenol in the lab versus isolated it from clove oil, and then they compared the inflammatory response between the two, they found out that the commercial synthetic eugenol had impurities in it that created a lot of inflammation compared to the natural eugenol. Okay? So there's definitely a difference between these two. Since there's a wide range of quality of essential oils on the market, we need to be very, very careful about what we're getting, because the chemistry from manufactured essential oils can have many, many different nasty compounds. I'm not going to get into all of the reasons between the right and left-handedness and polarity. I've given that on other talks. But the quality makes a huge difference in terms of the biology. I just mentioned before, one simple methyl group change and we can get a radical difference between one compound and another in these organic chemistry compounds. So quality makes a big difference, and that's why we say in our Family First Aid with essential oils, just say no to recreational fragrancing. Don't use these synthetic fragrances. These compounds get into the brain in the same way that essential oils do, but they are not therapeutic. They do not have good properties in your body, and so to avoid those things, and we say not just to avoid, but eliminate all these fragrances. These are not good compounds. And so we only use Young Living essential oils. We can trust that the plant is going to do the right thing for us. God made the plants. The plants have a genetic and a biochemistry designed to manufacture these essential oil compounds. The plant does it consistently every time. It never makes a mistake. So these plants are safe. They are common biology with us. We can trust what's in the plant. So then the question is, can we trust the company to bring us exactly what's in the plant into the bottle? And we can for Young Living. That's what they call seed to seal. From the seed, from the time they pick the seed and grow the plant, to the time they seal up that essential oil into the bottle, it is absolutely no adulteration. Nothing happens to it except to just take the pure compounds out of the plant and put it in the bottle. So we can trust what's in the plant, and we can trust Young Living to bring us what's in the plant. Thank you for spending some time here, and I hope you've gotten some basic information about essential oil chemistry, some of the biology that goes into it, some of the chemistry, a little bit of terminology to understand, and start to take apart some of these things about organic chemistry and terpenes and all the rest of this stuff. This is a very brief introduction. There's a lot of things that you can study, and I do encourage you to do so. It's a worthwhile pursuit, but in the meantime, happy oiling.